Well, good morning. This is February 12th, year 204. I have Captain Richard Smith with me as my guest this morning. I'm John Miller, representing the Palm Springs Air Museum, and Bonnie Krecklow is back there. She's going to be doing the writing on this. And Captain Smith, it's a pleasure to have you here, and you've had some great experiences, and we want you to tell us about it. So I'll move back to the camera and start asking you a few questions.
All right, as you see fit.
Well, Captain, start off, if you will, please, and tell us, well, first of all, to make this procedure right, your full name and birth date.
Richard Mansfield Smith, September 8th, 1921.
Okay, and Captain Smith, tell us where you were born and what brought your ancestors over here from the old country, and where they located.
I was born in Leeds, North Dakota, and the part of my Norwegian family emigrated, and the part of my Irish family immigrated in the potato famine. That's on my mother's side. On my father's side, the Dutch and the English have been here in pre-revolutionary days. And they kind of kept following the westward expansion, and they found the productive area in western Minnesota and eastern North Dakota and stayed there.
Did you grow up in Leeds? Is that where you went to high school?
My father moved about a little bit until I was 8 years old, and I basically grew up in a small town in western Minnesota of Dorn, Minnesota. But before that, I'd lived in Moorhead, Minnesota, and New Rockford, North Dakota, and Doyen, North Dakota.
Were your family, were they farmers in that area?
No, businessmen.
Businessmen?
Grain merchants.
Is that right?
Yes.
Well, it's still a great grain country up there.
Yes, it is.
Okay, high school experiences. What did you like to do, and what activities were you in?
Well, I didn't like school very much, and so I was mostly in athletics. I'd start with football and go into basketball and track and baseball, and did enough studying in between to graduate on time. But I never enjoyed a day of school in my life, and I went 16 years.
What were you doing, and what do you remember about December 7th, 1941?
Well, my roommate and I had hitchhiked over to Urbana, Ohio, from South Bend, Indiana. And we were sitting in his kitchen with his mother and dad drinking beer when the information came over the radio.
And you never forget that?
No. Those are things that are kind of indelible in your mind.
How long did it take you before you enlisted or made up your mind to enlist?
Well, I enlisted in January of 42.
You didn't wait very long.
Well, I knew I was going to have to go. I was young. I was in reasonably good health, and my father didn't need me at home at that time, and I just thought that if I enlisted, I would do a lot better getting what I wanted than if I waited for the draft.
So you enlisted and you were probably called up right away then?
No, as a matter of fact, I wasn't. I raised my right hand in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and they said, "Well, go back home and we'll tell you when we want you," and I didn't get the call until June, so I was home 5 months before I was called to active duty. But they paid me.
When did you know that you wanted to become a pilot? Probably before that, but...
I can remember Lindbergh when he made his tour around the United States after coming back from Paris, and my mother took me out to the airport at Fargo, North Dakota. And when I was about 15 years old, I saved up enough money at a penny a pound, and my first ride was an old Ford Tri-Motor.
It was.
And my mother and dad weren't very happy when I came home and told them about it.
Where did, after they called you up in June, then where did you go for classification and basic training?
San Antonio, Texas.
Well, you were right there where the pre-flight was too,
Yes, but I didn't pre-flight there.
didn't you?
No.
Okay, you were classified as a pilot right away?
Well, I had to go through training, primary, basic, and advanced. And then they made me an officer and a gentleman and considered me a pilot.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about primary training and advanced, where you went and any incidents that happened along the way.
Well, I'd been in a fairly rigorous university, so military training didn't bother me, and they sent us to Sikeston, Missouri for pre-flight, and I happened to get a really, really nice instructor, just a super guy. And from there we went to Enid, Oklahoma for basic training. And then at advanced flying school, they gave us a razor blade and we peeled paint for the first week we were there, because we were the first group that had gone into Pampa, Texas for advanced flying school, twin engine. And I didn't have any great problems. I didn't, you know, I didn't have to jump out of an airplane. I didn't have any crash landings, and I did what they told me to do, and I guess I did it reasonably well, because I just kind of went right through with the training, and I behaved myself to some extent.
You mentioned something about university. You had some college work
I had a year, 2.5 years
at what college?
at University of Notre Dame.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, that's interesting. We don't want to overlook that.
Well, you have to ask the right questions.
Okay, after you finished primary and advanced, then what happened?
Well, I was sent to Boise, Idaho for B-17 phase training. You want a little story there?
Yes, we want stories all along the way.
Well, one night, late afternoon, they put my name on a list to go flying with the crew. And so I went down and got into the airplane with the pilot and the rest of them. And the young man that had flying the airplane happened to have a bad night. And so the instructor pilot said to me, "Have you ever flown this airplane?" And I said, "No, it's the first time I've been in it." Well, that wasn't quite true, but with the engines running. And he says, "Well, it can't be any worse than it is. Get in the seat there." I got real lucky. I shot 3 really nice landings. We were taxiing back to the apron, and he said to me, "Well, they got the wrong man flying this airplane." The next time I looked at the duty roster, I had a crew of my own.
Good for you. So that was an
So I
opportunity.
had one orientation ride in a B-17 before I got a crew.
Did the other pilot have a little hangover that day? Is that what
Well,
happened?
I don't know. No, he seemed like a really nice guy. I think he was really uptight.
Too nervous.
Right, and I didn't think I was gonna have to fly the airplane, so, you know, nothing had really bothered me.
While we're talking about the B-17, we've got a picture there. Let's have you describe that to us, and you can point to some of the features and tell us what model B-17 that is.
Are you ready?
I'll just bring that in a little bit closer. There we are.
Well, I think the first thing, this is a B-17G. This had the turret in the nose, and the ones that I flew in combat were the Fs. That they didn't have this chin turret. I don't think there's any question but what they know that the pilot was here, and the co-pilot was over here, the top turret gunner was here. You can't see it, but there's a ball turret underneath the fuselage here.
Yeah.
And then there's a waist gunner on this side and a waist gunner on this side, and tail gunner's back here, and then the radio man was in the middle. He could take this window out, and he had a kind of a gun on a parabola that he could put out the top. I don't think he ever did, but he could have.
Okay. And the bombardier, obviously, he was up in the nose.
The bombardier and the navigator were down here in the nose. In our crew, we put everybody but the pilot and the co-pilot in the radio room for takeoff and landing. I don't know whether anybody else did that or not, but that's the way we did it.
Well, as like most of the other B-17 pilots, have a lot of respect for that airplane, and I presume you do too.
It was the only good airplane that the 8th Air Force had.
The only one, huh?
The Queen of the Sky.
Okay, well, it got you there and got you back. That's the main
Well, it
thing.
didn't quite get me back.
Not all the time, huh?
No.
Okay, well, let's, after you formed up there at, was that Boise?
Yes.
Then what happened?
Went to Spokane, Washington, and picked up the rest of the crew. The bombardier and the navigator and enlisted men.
Then off to Europe? Or
Oh, no,
you had,
no.
You had training then.
Yeah, we had a lot of training. They sent us out to Rapid City, South Dakota in the winter, and we never flew a day out there. The runways were so bad. And then we were in Wyoming, and then they sent us after we completed phase training, which really wasn't very much. I never flew. I never flew an hour of legal formation flying. A couple of us would get together and do some illegal formation flying, like 3 planes. And then they sent us to Grand Island, Nebraska, and gave us a new airplane and said, go to England. And so we did.
Where'd you refuel on the way over there?
Bangor, Maine, Goose Bay, Reykjavik, and on into, well, what's the big airport up in Denmark? Not in Denmark, in Scotland. The name escapes me at the moment.
But anyway, that's where you landed in Europe for the first time.
Right, yeah. And then they took the airplane away from us and sent us down south of London to Bovington. And they were going to, that's where we were supposed to move on to Bomber Base. And so one of my enlisted crew members came to me and said, hey, he says they're breaking up the crew and sending some here and some there and some there. So I went down to the first sergeant and I asked him for some order sheets and some, if I could use his typewriter. And so I sat down there and I sent everybody to the 95th Bomb Group. Signed my name on the bottom. Second lieutenant.
How'd that go over?
I never heard a word from anybody. Hell, they were so busy and they were as screwed up
As we are here today.
as you are here today. Yep.
All right, then if you would like to, tell us some incidents that happened after that.
Well, we got up to a little crossroads place where there was a church on one corner and an old house on another corner. They called it the Ancient House, and a nice flat field, and that was Horam in East Anglia, and that's where our base was. And so we did a orientation flight there, and on October 8th, we went to Bremen for the first time. And we were so damn dumb, we didn't know how tough the raid was, because it wound up being a pretty tough go. I can remember visiting with the co-pilot, and I had said it was an absolutely beautiful day in the fall. There wasn't a cloud anywhere. And all of a sudden, here was this great big black thunderhead in front of us. And I said to the other pilot, Bill Bohr, I said, you know, what's going on here? There's a thunderhead and there's nothing else around. And then it dawned on us we were going to drive right through that stuff. And then there was, not too far in front of us, there was a great big black fireball, and that was a B-17 that had taken a direct hit. And we still, you know, just, and this was in the days before there was any fighter escort. And then we went to some other places in Germany, and we went up to Mariensburg in East Prussia, and we went to Norway to bomb the heavy water plant. We made a trip to Paris for the remote factory that was building war material for the Germans. And so on January 30th, we were headed for Ludwigshafen, which was quite a ways into Germany. And it was a real easy raid until we were just a little bit north of Paris, and one engine froze up. We must have had a little bit of flak in the oil reservoir, and so with the crankshaft broke, we had a big break out there, and we couldn't keep up with the group. And the 95th was the last group over the target that day, so we were on our own, and we got jumped by 7 fighters, and it took them maybe 5 minutes to finish the airplane. We all bailed out. The 3 guys in the back of the airplane were hit pretty hard, so they had to be turned into the Germans so they get them in a hospital, and the rest of us were loose on the ground.
And then what happened?
Well, for me personally, I landed in a grain field where there was a very, very old Frenchman plowing with a team of oxen and a one-bottom plow. And I took off my parachute and my Mae West and my flying boots, and I put them in the where he was plowing, in the furrow, and asked him to plow over it. Well, as a sidelight, about 6 or 7 days later, I found my parachute all dyed up in nice blue and brown colors and dresses. Some of the local women.
They weren't going to waste that material.
So anyway, the old Frenchman, he pointed one way and said Allemand, and he pointed the other way and said Kamerad. Well, I didn't know Allemand at that time, but I knew Kamerad, and he pointed up to what they would say was the forest. And so I went into the forest quite a ways, and I did a right turn, I thought might be along the edge of the forest, and I stuck my head out a couple of times, and I saw a hedgerow, and I thought, well, we had been briefed to get out of the immediate area as soon as possible, and kind of like travel by night. So I thought I was pretty well hidden in the woods, so I went down, and on the far side of the hedgerow, you know, nobody was going to watch on the other side of the hedgerow. And I found a little opening in the hedgerow, and so I ducked down in there. Well, I could hear a couple of trains down in front of me, so my master plan was that after dark I'd go down and stay along the railroad track, and when I'd hopped trains all of my life as a kid in the country. And I'd get on the train and take it wherever it went, and then after a while I'd get off and start asking for help. Well, about the time I was ready to leave, 3 young Frenchmen showed up, and they had a sack of clothes, lousy as hell. Oh God, I came out of France, you can't believe. So they indicated for me to change clothes, and they had, each one of them had a 45, and so I thought, well, that's probably the thing to do. And we walked across the field down to this little town where I'd heard the trains, and obviously we're visiting with the local gendarme, the sheriff or whatever they might call him. And they put me in the back of a Renault, in the trunk, folded me up, and took me, I don't know, 25 minutes across country. And we came into a farmstead. I didn't know it at the time, but after I got out of the trunk, I could tell it. And we went inside, and there was the other pilot, the co-pilot Bill Bohr, and the radio operator Al Mealy.
Well, wasn't that something?
Yeah, we were very happy to see one another. And so the other people, maybe 5 or 6 of them, were very busy talking. And of course, we didn't have a clue as to what was going on. And they'd given us some wine and some bread. So I see they were drinking out of a bottle, and one man said, you know, with sign language, would you like some? And I said, yeah. So he gave me a glass, and I poured some in there, what would be a good shot, and I tipped her down. I couldn't talk for a half an hour. It was like 190 proof alcohol. It was
Wow.
called Calvados, distilled Applejack. Well, we slept on the floor that night, and we just hung around in the house, in the farmhouse, all the next day. And they told us to be very quiet because half of the house was pro-Ally and half the house was pro-German. That the older couple were pro-German. I think, as I look back on it after a lot of years, I think we dropped into a pretty heavily communist area in France because several other things popped up. And anytime I've gone back there and tried to find anybody that helped me or any of us, and I put ads in the paper, and I put pictures in the paper, nobody comes forward. There is a family I go back to see because I lived with them. Some of us lived with them for 2 weeks. And they were just some common peasants. But I've never been able to find any of the other people that helped any of us. So then the next night they put us in a car, and it was kind of eerie driving along before curfew, seeing the local young ladies walking down the streets with German soldiers, well, or walking down the country lanes.
Oh, really?
And you kind of wondered what the whole situation was, but biology being what it is, because there were no young Frenchmen around. So we moved into an abandoned house in a town, a good-sized town called Saint-Just. And we were there 7 or 8 days. And we had a delightful young French girl feeding us twice a day. She'd bring us breakfast and then bring us supper. Good-looking girl. So one night she came and she said, I can't come back here anymore. By that time, we picked up a few words, and the radio operator was Italian, and between the little Italian that he knew and a little French, we were starting to get some information. And she said, my husband tells me I'm staying here too long visiting. So they made some other arrangements for us to get some food, and then one morning, the local resistance leader, his name was Captain Jacques. He was a very hard-looking man, and he was married to the good-looking girl that was feeding us.
Oh, I see.
And he came, and he could speak English. This is how we'd gotten some information over the days. The house we were in didn't have any facilities, and we were obliged not to go out during the daytime for the outdoor facilities. And we just sat around and talked, and the local French people, when they'd come at night, because we were we were local heroes, and we were really topics of conversation, and a lot of people wanted to come and take a look at some American aviators, and we were all pilots. And they would tell us that, well, tomorrow night they're coming with an airplane and they're gonna take you home. The next day it'd be they're coming with a submarine and then we'll take you up to the coast. And so we were talking, and I said to the other two guys, I said, well, you know, they're not gonna send an airplane over to pick up a first lieutenant, a second lieutenant, and a staff sergeant, so we just sit and take it easy and see what happens. Well, when this man came back in the morning, he said, you have to move. And we said, okay, you know, why? Well, some of the local people have seen smoke coming out of the chimney from an abandoned house, and they're wondering what's going on. So they moved us into a little one-bedroom house, which today are the family I go back to see. I don't see the two people that helped me, but I see their kids and their, what would be their grandchildren. And so they had a kind of a barn deal out in the back, and so we'd take turns sleeping in the bed and sleeping on the floor, two in the bed and one on the floor, and then we'd rotate. And old Paul and Yvonne, they'd go out in the barn and sleep in the hay, I guess. And they had a brand new baby. It's kind of interesting, even today when I go back and I see, they had about 6 kids. And they had one that was brand new, a little girl. So I always kid her, I said, yeah, you know, I know all about you, I changed your shorts when you were really little. And she gives me a bad time. So we stayed there for 3 or 4 days, and then they came one morning and, well, while we were in the town of San Jose, we would be invited out for dinner some nights to the doctor's house, to the mayor's house, to the sheriff's house, because, well, we were alive and we were celebrities, you might say. And so we'd walk to these various places. And Yvonne Begg was a super cook, and we ate a lot of rabbit, a lot of lop and stew, but they had really good wine. And so I said to him one time when we were sitting there drinking the wine, I said, how come we got all this good wine? I thought all this had been confiscated by the Germans. And they said, no, we hid it in the manure pile. So then one morning they came and said, well, you're gonna move. So they came with a great big old 7-passenger limousine, and there's no gasoline in France at this time. And by that time, that morning, they brought the Baltwerk gunner who had been shot through the thigh, and they had a doctor take him and sew him up a little bit. He lived better than any of us. He lived in a nice French chateau. Had the young madam there was very, very nice to him, and he used to laugh. And he said, you know where this bullet went through? He said there was a little infection there. He said every morning she'd come in and she'd lay her cheek down on it and say, oh my, that's hot, that's hot. So anyway, we got in this limousine and we're headed for Paris. And we come to a railroad crossing, and there's a freight going by. And so we stop, and a carload of German soldiers pulled right up alongside of us. They'd given us, each one of us, a 45 in the morning. How long do you want this to go on?
You just keep, this is so interesting, you just keep on talking, right, Bonnie?
Yeah.
No, you just keep on talking.
So anyway, they'd given us in the morning, we didn't have any papers. They'd taken our dog tags away from us. We had nothing.
Are we still in French peasant clothes?
Oh yeah, I was in my Sunday go to meeting clothes, and so they gave each one of us a 45 and said, if you get stopped or something, you just start shooting and running because you know you have no identification, you've got nothing. So it was a little tense there for about 10 minutes while we waited for the freight to go by. And why these guys, they could see four young guys sitting in the back end of this car, this limousine that didn't have, you must have got like 4 or 5 miles to the gallon, you know. And they were just sitting there talking, and we tried not to look at them, but how could you not, you know, out of the corner of your eye, and they'd look over at us every once in a while. So anyway, we got to Paris and and our chauffeur was lost. Now you have to remember in 1944 there was no traffic in Paris at all. An occasional car, an occasional bus and some bicycles. So there was no problem driving around. And he kept going and here and going there, and finally he stopped and got on the telephone. And when I stopped, looked back to think about it, you know, you wonder how the telephone would work and under such conditions. But anyway, he took us to a very nice, very small apartment where an English lady had got caught in France and hadn't been able to get out before the Germans overran Paris. And she was an absolutely delightful lady, and she said, you know, I just absolutely can't keep 4 of you young men in this apartment. She said, just look around, you can see that. And so we said, okay, what do you want us to do? Well, she said, I'm gonna make a telephone call, and 2 of you are gonna have to leave, but I'll have it all set. So, I don't know, I suppose in a half hour, 45 minutes, she said, well, 2 of you are gonna have to go, and you go out the door and you turn right, you go down to the end of the block, on the Champs-Élysées, and look across the street, and you'll see a man with a paper in his, stuck in the left pocket of his coat. So then, who's gonna walk? Well, the ball turret gunner couldn't walk, because his leg is still bad. The co-pilot was a little shook. So it was gonna be the radio operator and myself. So off we start, we're walking down the Champs-Élysées about 4:30 in the afternoon, trying to follow a guy on the far side, bumping shoulders with German soldiers.
Oh, boy. Oh, my goodness.
Now, we'd been told when you see the man go into a door, he'll cross the street and walk into a door. You walk right in behind him. Well, we wound up right across from the right across from the Grand Hotel, and just down from the Opera. And we stayed there for 2 weeks. We had really, really good living there. And it was a nice couple. The lady couldn't speak any English, but the man, the husband, could speak pretty good English. And we'd have a big party every night. And there must have been a Jewish connection there somewhere, because every night there'd be a different 4 or 5 or 6 different couples, Jewish, and you know, they had the Star of David on them. And so one day we said, well, you know, where does the money come from for all of this good food? And 2 days a week, the madam would go out into the country and buy black market food. And that's why she had the food, and that's why she'd have all the company come.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the second night we were there was a rap on the door, and she opened the door, and in walks a German soldier. So, well, we thought the damn jig was up, but we just sat there.
Were you still armed?
No, the guy in the limousine, he took the gun.
He got the 45s, huh?
He got the gun. So now we don't have anything. But anyway, so we just sat there, and he passed the lady or something, and you could tell in just a minute she was grinding coffee beans. So, and he asked her a couple questions. So when he was gone, the gist of the whole deal was he came down every night, and he had fresh coffee beans, and there were German soldiers living on the 3rd floor of this apartment, and we were living on the 5th floor. And he would get the coffee beans ground for his officers. And then he asked the lady, I see you've got company. she said, yes, we have relatives from the south of France, because here's two big husky guys, you know, and the Frenchmen aren't so very big. So, one night, oh, I don't know, 4 or 5 days later, we'd been having a very nice party, and the soldier walks in to get his coffee beans ground. And there's a knot-headed Jewish lady sitting next to me, and she starts, you could tell by the tone of her voice she was giving him a bad time. And he was talking back to her. I thought to myself, you old biddy, you know, shut your mouth.
Well, yeah,
We're gonna be in trouble here. So after she left, we got a hold of old Alphonse and said, what was that all about? And he said, well, she was giving the German soldier a bad time and telling him that when the American airmen got to France, they were gonna put the run on all the Germans and kick them out of the country. And he said to her, he said, I'd sooner be home anyway. Which is pretty typical of a GI, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Even if he was in Paris, he wasn't particularly happy. So one morning, a beautiful young French girl came to me and she said, get up and get dressed, you're going. And she said to Al Mealy, the radio operator, why don't you stay here and run a radio for us? He says, no thanks.
Get out of here.
Just get me out of here if you can. So we had a very delightful early morning ride on the subway. And we got down to the train station, and there I got some papers. I had a discharge from the French Army. I had a license to say that I was a geologist. I had papers to report to Germany in, I don't know, 2 months or something for duty. And I had a pass to go up through the lines to get on the coast, because it was very difficult. Wasn't so difficult to move around in France, but it was difficult to get within, I don't know, 4 or 5 kilometers of the coast, because there was a lot of fortifications going on. And so my girl, who could speak beautiful English, said to me, she said, as soon as you get on that train and it leaves the station, you go back in the men's room and try to look like it's old and worn out and crinkled. And she said, don't talk to anybody on the train. Don't talk to anybody. So I'm sitting in one of those, you know, they had the aisle down along the side, and where you sat along toward the other side. And in the normal course of events, all the French people, they all brought their stuff with them, a bottle of wine and a basket and some fruit or cheese and a little baguette. And so they saw me, they'd see me sitting there, and they, excuse me, they'd offer me food, or, you know, and all I could do was just kind of shake my head. I was smart enough to keep the paper up, right side up, that they gave me to read. But the French people were getting on and off the train, so I didn't make the whole trip with the same people. And every time the train would stop and start up again, then the German gendarmes would come down through the train and want to see your papers.
Oh, yeah?
And I'd been told, just when you see them coming, you know, and they're a row ahead of you, just take the papers out of your pocket and hold them up and watch them out of the corner of your eye. When they give them back to you, put them back in your pocket. And we had been told that, I've been told later that the only way that worked was that the French absolutely refused to recognize the Germans as their occupiers. And other than a few of the good time girls, nobody else ever talked to them, to any of the German soldiers. So they were kind of used to being ignored. So when the train, I'd been told that when you get to this town of Saint-Brieuc, you go to the square, which is going to be right where the depot is, and after a certain length of time, a narrow gauge train will come right through the square, and you get on the train, and you stay on the train until you see a girl a young girl with a leather coat and high rubber boots walk down the aisle of the train, and when she gets off, you get off and you follow her. So anyway, while I'm waiting for the train, by now I got pretty decent clothes on. I got a black hat and I got a coat that comes down just above my ankles, and I'm in pretty good shape. And so to have something to do, I kept walking around the square. I didn't want to appear to be conspicuous, but I didn't want to just stand in the doorway either. So I walked around the square a few times, and the train came, and I got on. And pretty soon this girl walks down the aisle, and I said, oh, okay. 6 young guys got up, followed her off the train. Down the train we went, and walked along the embankment for a while, and walked into a house. And so there'd been 5 other guys on that train, along with me, that had been moved up there that were going into this house, which was probably a quarter of a mile off the beach. So we got to talking about it, and one guy said, you know, we were scared as hell because we thought you were Gestapo. You kept walking around and walking around. You had this black hat, this long black coat. And we weren't very happy when we saw you get on the train. So we were there 2 nights, and the deal was is that the BBC would broadcast messages at like 5 and 10 or 6 and 10, and so the first 2 nights they were supposed to come to get us. They broadcast that the deal was off, and the next night they said, well, they're coming. So we all got together, followed our little girl in the boots. We went into a house in a very small town, and there were about 25 of us. And we got briefed. You stay right in line, don't deviate, and don't talk, don't make any noise. And when you get to the cliff, you put your hand on each other, make some contact, so that if somebody starts to fall, somebody's gonna help them. Because we went down right down the straight cliff. There's some pictures of it. So they led us through some cow barns and some pig yards, and so that the dogs would have no scent of us going by.
Oh, they're pretty smart.
So we got down, we went down the cliff and waiting on the beach for the ship to come, the boat, well, the ship. And so we could hear some boats scraping, and we thought, oh, well, okay. Well, the boats left. And we found out later that the first boats that came in, like the rowboats, you know, that they brought in a lot of food, a lot of medicine, and a lot of clothes and supplies, but they didn't bring any money. And the guy that was in charge, and I met him later, the guy that was in charge of our group, he says, you don't get any escapers and evaders till we get the money. And that's where the money came from for the lady in Paris to go out and buy the black market stuff. But the money stopped right there at the big cities. There was no money ever at that point paid out to the poor buggers out in the country that were feeding us on their rations. And so we got on this gunboat and went up the rope ladder over the side, and right there, staring right in the face, was the guy behind a .303 machine gun. Wasn't a very nice entrance, you know.
Was this a British boat?
Yeah, was it what they called a motor gunboat. So pretty soon they got everybody on board, and we all went down on kind of a square little hole, and there were bunks down there for I don't know whether all 25 of us, because we weren't only aviators that they were taking out. They were taking out some hot Frenchmen, and there was a Russian kid on there that how the hell they ever got that far west, nobody could figure out. And I haven't, with all the stories I've read to this day, it said there was a Russian lieutenant in this first group. But that's all they ever say. And in the normal course of events, the only English words he knew were some four-letter ones, you know. That's pretty sad. So when we got back to England, we were given brand new British infantry uniform and marched onto a train and taken into London where we were debriefed. And they had to send somebody in from the 95th Bomb Group to positively identify us. Well, the guy that came in to identify us, he'd never seen us and we'd never seen him either, but he said, oh yeah, they're 95th. So away we went. And there's only two other little interesting parts of the story. One of them is that when we got back out the 95th Bomb Group, the procedure was that when a crew didn't come back, everybody divided up your clothes. You know, they left you one grade A uniform and a picture, and somebody would read the mail to make sure your wife or your mother wasn't getting some correspondence she wasn't supposed to have. And then they'd take what they picked up and they take it down to the quartermaster and put it in a box and eventually to be shipped home. Well, when you got back, like when I got back, I just put a notice on the bulletin board. I said, Richard M. Smith has returned, bring back my stuff. And other than maybe missing some socks and some underwear, the only thing I really lost, well, I had a good chronograph watch that somebody picked up. And then the colonel wanted to see me. So I went up to see him, and we've been sworn to secrecy for 50 years.
50 years?
50 years.
To protect the French?
That's why you never heard anything about, well, if you want, I can get into that a little bit later. To not tell anybody what happened after you jumped out of the airplane until you got back to England. So I'm visiting with the colonel, and he said, well, Lieutenant, tell me what happened. I said, I'm sorry, sir, I can't. Oh, yeah, I said, you can tell me. I said, well, I took an oath that I wouldn't tell anybody anything for 50 years. I just can't tell you. Okay. So we visited a little while longer, and that's when I got, I could tell by the way he was acting, it was time for me to go. And he said, well, Lieutenant, is there anything I can do for you? And that's when I said, yeah, you can promote me. And I said, promote me in the ETO, the European Theater of Operation, because if I get back in the States, I'll never get promoted. I'd be damned if he didn't promote me.
Great.
So I went through the rest of the war. Went through the rest of the war as a captain. Well, we're in London, and I got the other pilot and two enlisted men with me, and the Air Transport Command limited us to 50 pounds per person, and so 12 officers, we had 2 B-4 bags plumb full of stuff. You can't do that. So I said to the enlisted men, I says, come here. We went into the men's room and I said, just empty your bags into the trash can. We're gonna put our stuff in there. And when we land in the States, the first time we stop, I'll get you a whole brand new issue of everything you need. And they looked at me kind of funny, but hell, I'm the officer. So we got back to Floyd Bennett Field in New York and went down to the quartermaster, and I said, there are 4 of us, we've been through kind of a different experience, and these 2 young enlisted men, they don't have any gear except what they've got on. So I said, I'll give them a whole set, everything they need, and give me the sheet and I'll sign it. So they all went home with all brand new duds. And then we all got a month's leave. And I guess that's about the end of the story.
Captain, let me go back here. Did all of your crew make it out of France?
No, 3 of them went in the POW camp for 18 months. And one guy that went right down in the same area we did, the top turret gunner, he was on the loose in France for 5.5, 6 months.
Wow. Okay, one other question. You got down there to the beach. Wasn't that fortified? Wasn't that patrolled? Didn't the Germans have
They
that?
patrolled up on the top.
I see.
That's why they didn't want any scent for the dogs.
Oh.
They patrolled the top. You couldn't patrol the beach because there'd be jetties running out that were rocks, you know, and just straight up and down. So there was no way anybody could walk down along the beach. And yes, it was fortified. There was a big point off the left and a big point off the right, and there were big German gun emplacements there. And I've been to both of them.
Where would that be in relation to Utah or Omaha Beach?
Oh, well, you know the Brest Peninsula?
Yes.
Okay, well, we were on the foot of the Brest Peninsula on the Atlantic, you know. What would it say? Well, on the side that faced England.
So it'd be.
We weren't on the far side of the.
It'd be south of the other beaches where the.
No, we'd be north and west of the invasion beaches.
Oh, you would be.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm not familiar as I thought I was with.
Well, that's why you're not familiar with it. They were beaches, had a little bit of a spot of sand on this one beach that where the locals would come to go swimming, but it was so rough you couldn't launch a boat there, you know, or tie one up, and the tide was high enough so it was used for a little swimming on occasion, but it was not a place where a lot of people came to vacation and tourists and one thing and another.
Well, we're going to have to change tapes here pretty soon. Would this be a good place to break this off and then pick it up again after you got?
I'm done unless you want to know what happened to me after the war.
Well, we do, sure.
Well,
You didn't have to go back and get hitched up with another bomb group.
no. How much longer how much more of this do you want to hear?
Well, there's 8 minutes on this tape, but we'll take all the time you got.
Oh, we should be able to do it in 8 minutes.
All right.
Well, so I was reassigned down to, after I got back to States, I was reassigned down to Fort Myers, Florida to a gunnery school. And I was down there for about 18 months, and then we can stop anytime. Eastern Airlines, whose boss, Eddie Rickenbacker, was a good friend of Ira Akers, who was the commanding general of the 8th Air Force, and he needed pilots. So he said, you must have some guys there that have done something that you don't need them anymore, and give them to me. So I took the mental and the physical and that kind of stuff for Eastern Airlines and went to work for them. So I was out of the service before the war in Europe was over.
I see.
And so I flew with Eastern for a while. And then when the war in the far east or far west, however you want to say it, in Japan was over, and the gas rationing went off on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, on Monday I knew that I did not want to live in New York City. And so I just went down and visited with the operations officer and told him I wanted to go back to school and that I didn't want to live in New York. And he said, I got a stack this high of guys that are waiting for your job. So he said, I said, well, you know, if I owe you anything, all you have to do is tell me and I'll be glad to stay on however long it takes. No, he said, you go ahead. Well, he said, all we're out is little training. So I went back to school for a year and a half.
We're at Notre Dame?
Yeah, and finished up there. In the meantime, I met a girl from out in the country, and I gave her a snow job, and so I graduated from Notre Dame on June 7th, 1947, and married her on June 14th, 1947. And we had 3 kids. She was killed in an automobile accident when the youngest one was about 2 years old. And I worked in a country, a very successful country grain business operation. Well,
Up in the
farm
Midwest?
elevators, you know, with country elevators.
Yeah, sure.
We had 15 of those buggers. And so my dad got a little older, and none of my kids wanted to be in the grain business, and none of my sister's kids wanted to be in the grain business. One day I said to my dad, you know, we're in a really good time in the agriculture business. Let's sell these. And I thought he'd go right through the roof because it had been his baby. He'd started it in 1929. He says, I think you're right, let's sell it. So I've been without a paycheck since 1973.
15 elevators, a lot of elevators.
Yeah, we did well.
That's great. And when did you move out here?
Well, you know, I'm a Viking and I got the wanderlust, so we spent about 12 years down in old Mexico, my wife and I. We were down south of Puerto Vallarta. And God bless her, she decided that we needed to be closer to good medical training. So in 1994, we made a change and came up here. And we rented for a year and then we bought. So here we are. I still don't get a paycheck though.
Well, I don't think you're on food stamps. This has been so interesting. We've got a couple minutes here yet. Bonnie, you think of anything you'd like to ask the captain?
Not right now.
I think that's a remarkable escape that you had. I've heard about the French partisans and how they helped, but I've never talked to anybody that was actually
There really
made it out.
There really aren't too many of us at the height. Right after the war, there were quite a few because there were a lot of guys that were crash landing and getting shot down, but they weren't really apprehended by the Germans at all. They, if they got a hold of somebody local, they would keep them for maybe a day or two. To join our group, the Air Force's Cape and Evasion Society, you had to be gone for at least a month.
Uh-huh.
So if you were gone for 3 or 4 days, you didn't qualify. Now we had at one time 900, but we're getting a little thinner. And I made the first meeting of this, and I was on the board of directors, and I've been the president of this group for about the last 5 years. We're a unique group. We bring helpers back to every one of our annual reunions. And we put people together that haven't seen each other for 50, 55,
Oh,
60
isn't that
years.
great?
Yeah, it is. Very unique.
Where do you meet?
Well, because we're scattered around the country, we go someplace different every year. We
Oh,
were Wichita Falls, Texas last year. We're going to Philadelphia this year. Then we're going to New Orleans the next year. But we've been all over the United States.
I tell you, Captain, this has been so interesting, and you brought some data along, and I want you to talk with Bonnie about what you want to leave here and what will go into the library. And I've got a tape here for you that I'll give to you of this hour
Okay.
of taping, and appreciate it very much. This was so interesting.
You're more than welcome. My pleasure.